oomphinc.com website. Okay, we are at 4:15. I think that means it is time for me to kick this off. So let me, okay. Oh, last question. Do I know Phil Frilling at Oomph? Yes, I know Phil, and Phil is the greatest. He's one of my favorite coworkers. I actually just had a one-on-one with him as a catching up. Cool to interact with the Drupal community and everyone who knows everyone. So, okay, thank you for that, Ryan, right before we get started. So, welcome to SEO and Drupal, designing and developing a search-friendly site. My name is DJ Kadamus, and I am a digital project manager at Oomph Inc., and we are based in Providence, Rhode Island. I am also based in Providence, Rhode Island, close to our headquarters. A little about me: I work as a project manager with delivery and retainer clients on both Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, and hopefully some Drupal 9 sites upcoming. I also work as our SEO strategist, and I am involved with all of our delivery projects to make sure that they rank. And when no one is looking, I really enjoy doing some Drupal config and trying to be a bit of a technical engineer there. And yes, I photoshopped that mask on right before the talk. A little change of pace. A little bit about Oomph. We are a full-service web agency. We are headquartered in Providence, Rhode Island, but we have some employees all over the state, including, you can see Phil out here in Southwest Ohio. We help companies with our digital strategy, user experience design, and Drupal implementation. Some of our clients include Blue Cross Blue Shield, the American Veterinary Medical Association, AVMA. They will be kind of featured throughout this talk. The Rhode Island School of Design, Brown University, Princeton University, Leica Geosystems, and many more. A lot of our Drupal work revolves around complex implementations, systems integration, e-commerce, multilingual, and a lot of accessibility. So here is kind of an overview of what we're going to cover today. First, we'll talk about just an overview of SEO best practices, especially in tandem with user experience. We'll talk about what designers need to think about when they're wireframing a site. And then designing, we'll talk about what engineers need to know when they're implementing a site. And we'll talk about some good and bad examples of SEO throughout. So let's start with a relatively quick overview of search engine optimization. But before we jump in, I like to start with this kind of caveat, which is that if you Google things, you know just about 80% of SEO as any SEO strategist. If you're involved in the Drupal community, if you're a technical user, you probably know a lot about this. And my hope is for this talk, not for you to have to learn a million new things, but to really put it all together and say, oh, I knew all of this, and I just wanted a little bit of the bigger picture. So let's take a step back for a second, and let's talk about what's going to be the theme of this, and that's the relationship between user experience and SEO. And specifically what I will call the user search experience, and how what you write on pages appears on a Google search, and that will influence your page rank. So you can see here I Googled something called COVID-19 veterinary guidelines. And so this is a page that goes to what veterinarians need to know when dealing with COVID-19. And if you look below the title in this search engine results snippet at the top, you'll see the text says, stay up to date on the latest COVID-19 information, yada, yada, yada. That is not the meta description we identified for this page, ironically enough. And Google is pulling in the text under the left block that says free webinars. And I like to show this as a recent example that just because you write something in your meta description does not necessarily mean that Google will automatically display it. So this shows the importance of good copy on your site. And when you're thinking about good copy, you should think about how it is search optimized. So so when you're writing any copy on the site, adding any headings, doing anything like that, I think there is one really important thing to keep in mind when it comes to SEO, which is Google wants to keep the user on Google. Hence all of the search engine result page snippets that you see, the SERP snippets. And there are 16 snippets. And if you think about the business goals of Google, it kind of makes sense what they're going to show you. So they either want to push you to a Google product. So that is YouTube or something of that nature, maps, the business page, for example, on the maps page. Or they want to push you to a profit. So that is, an advertisement, for example. And then they really just want to keep you on Google. And I think I just saw Ian Bullock put something really interesting in the chat that I'll get to later, but he said you've noticed that the description and even the title will change based on the search query. And yes, that is true. That is more of an in-depth article, as you can see in the below in the top left. And an in-depth article, Google will display up to 320 characters for something, and that keeps the user on Google because it will probably answer the question without having to click onto the page. So let's talk about some examples in practice. So on the left, you have my main man, Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is a knowledge panel. And so you can see at the top, you have images. Then you have the description about Neil, about a few, facts that are notable for people. And then you have some TV shows that he's been involved with and things like that. So say if you Google something such as, who is the guy from the new Cosmos, this result will come up. And the goal for Google is just to answer your question for you on Google without necessarily sending you to an article. But if Google determines that the best place for you to receive that information is an external site, they will feed that content first. And on the right, you have a map. This is what we call a local pack specifically. And I searched takeout restaurants in Providence, and you can see below the map, you have a few different restaurants. If you click any of the restaurant names, you go to Google Maps. If you click more places, the card expands. And so this is Google trying to keep you on Google. But let's talk about something that may actually jump you elsewhere. So let's Google an existential question, like what is Drupal? And so if you Google a question such as what is Drupal, you get results chock full of snippets. So the top is your classic Google search result, 150 characters in the meta description. This is pulling in the accurate meta description. So it's still important to always set that, even though Google may identify something else. Then below you have your related questions. And so this is, if you're Googling a question, they just want to maybe give you another result and maybe answer your question. And is Drupal dead? To that I answer, no way, Jose. Below that, you have your about, and that is actually what Ian was referencing, I believe, and that you see on the about page, the reference, the meta description is over 300 characters. And now we get a little interesting. So now here's Google trying to give you the best videos possible. And it's tough. In the bottom left of each video, there's the time. And so Google is actually feeding you 3 perfect videos to start with. You have your medium length video, 8 minutes. You have a really long tutorial of over an hour, and then a short tutorial of about 1 minute and 10 seconds. And so they want to move you from one Google product, their google.com, to another, YouTube. And then on the right, we have the mobile display. Shout out dark mode. This is a screenshot. Quick note, and this is maybe something to write down, a good statistic. Mobile searches account for about 50% of searches. So you always need to take a look at your Google Search Console or something of that nature to see how many users are searching for content on your website from their phone. Desktop makes about 45%, tablet the other 5%, give or take. So it's always important to consider your audience. So if you have a business that has predominantly mobile traffic, it's really important to think about how a user will be Googling for mobile information. And then if you look, you actually have a bunch of different tabs. I'm using the Google app for iPhone. So I have a bunch of different tabs that I could click into and get some more information. However, I know if you have, if you do B2B business, then you will more likely have more desktop users than mobile users. And in that case, it's also important to think about the desktop experience when someone is Googling. So what's the point of all of this, of that long introduction? Besides to, one, I want to flaunt the lowercase w in our Playfair display font. This is one of our core fonts at Oomph. Now, the point is just to be engaging with Google. And I was hoping while you were reviewing those, you were saying to yourselves, I kind of knew all this. That's exactly the point. And so you know enough to make tactical recommendations and improvements when designing and building your Drupal websites. So here is the screenshot, the stuff that still matters when you're developing any website. So this is on-site search engine optimization. On the left, we have some of our non-technical items that are still really important for SEO. Your metadata, so those are your title tags, meta descriptions, Open Graph Protocol. If you're a content administrator, this is anything that will go into the meta tags module. Internal linking is also important. So you would like your website to communicate with itself, and that is very important for SEO. For example, if you're writing a blog post and you're referencing a service that your company offers, you should link that page to on your website within that blog. Alternative text is also very important for image SEO. So if someone's Googling an image, the alternative text description will help that rank at the top and is a good way to get traffic, because Google actually, if you do an image search and then click that image, you don't just see the image, you go to the page with the image on it. So this is really important. And it's also incredibly important for accessibility. And accessibility is a ranking factor for the Google algorithm. So an inaccessible website will hurt your organic traffic. Conversion rate optimization, so how well your forms and goals perform is important. So say if you have a form that gets 1 million visitors and no one fills it out, that is not good. And that is a knock against you. And then duplicate content is still really important and something we see all the time. And really just don't do it. If you're writing a blog post and you've already written that post in the past, just remove that old one. If you end up writing the same services information on all of your different pages, that is also going to be a negative ranking factor. So on the right, the technical items, your schema.org markup. So this is important for Google to index your sitemap. Every website should have a sitemap with the proper schema.org markup. Usually you can handle this with a module, and you submit that to Google, and that's how it will index your site. So when you publish some new content, Google indexes the sitemap, and then the new content is findable can be found within a Google search. Robots, just let your robots in. This is how Google crawls pages. This is how your analytics works. You should always have this enabled, except for pages that you would like to hide, such as form success pages. Page speed, important. I should have bold. A website, page speed has been a ranking factor from Google for a long, long time. And now they even offer a page speed insights tool where you can plug in your website, get a result of how fast your site is and how to make the improvements. If you have a slow website that takes forever to load, that is a negative ranking factor. Redirects, I get this question a lot. Is it okay to add redirects? Yes, it is perfectly okay to add redirects to a site, but don't overdo them. Some are okay. Don't go crazy, and make sure you understand the difference between a 301 redirect and 302, for example. Okay, some status codes. This is something that's important for Google Search Console. You want results in the 200s. You don't want to receive a lot of 400 and 404s or any 504 URLs that come in within your Google Search Console report. And you don't want any URLs out there that will go to a 404. That is really bad. Overall URL structure is important. So keep it limited and have it reference the parent item. So say if you have a blog post, you should have your domain name /blog or /news or whatever you're using / the blog post name. You don't want domain name / the blog post name. That just muddles everything up. And then domains matter. So you would like to make sure that you're using top-level domains such as .com, .org, things like that. Google does not like things such as .name or .agency or anything like that. So I don't mean to start any wars, but if you work at another agency, but Google prefers .com. Okay, other stuff that still matters, some off-site SEO, link building. It's important to have backlinks. So you can generate this with blogs, relationships, and general credibility. It's really important to have other websites sourcing your material. That is good for SEO. Social media marketing. This is an easy place where you can kind of stir the pot for your links, get traffic to your website. It is important to note that a link on Facebook is not a backlink. So that is just a social link. It is reviewed separately. Brand mentions. I think it's important to just stay on top of when people are talking about your company without necessarily adding you on Twitter or Facebook or something like that. There are tools that can deliver this information for you within Moz or SEMrush or something like that. And then staying on top of how your domain authority is viewed. So Google swears that domain authority is not a ranking factor, which is true, but it's also not true because the things that create good domain authority also create positive SEO. So it is still important to understand what your domain authority is if you are tracking that information. And then a few other things, local SEO. If you run a local company, you should tailor that SEO to where you live. I saw some people in the chat from Ohio. I should not advertise that I am, if I own a pastry shop in Providence, I not be writing articles based on Youngstown, Ohio, or something of that nature. Favors. And then just research. Stay on top of your keyword research. Always look for opportunities. Usually you can just start this process by Googling, but this is actually like a whole separate talk, but just keyword research is important. And then trying to stay on top of some ranking changes. Google will change their algorithm every now and then, and that can cause problems for your SEO in general. So just make sure you catch those, what we call the slaps in the face from Google, where all of a sudden you'll see your traffic just drop in Google Analytics. So just try to keep on top of those. So this is for the designers. So what should designers and UX engineers be thinking about when wireframing and designing a website from the start? So thinking of all of what we were talking about, data, really important. It's everyone who works on a website should have a decent understanding of the data involved, where the users are coming from, who the users are, so on and so forth. So here is just our, what we at Oomph use as a basic swath of places to gather data. Google Analytics, Google Search Console, Hotjar is good for heat mapping. Google Optimize is good for A/B testing. We like to use that maybe before approaching a redesign, just doing some quick HTML changes. And then I personally like SEMrush, and we use that for gathering keyword data, rankings, all things like that. So let's kind of put this into an example. And here is a Google Search Console quick report for, this is for the American Veterinary Medical Association, as you can see on the bottom, AVMA. And so this is a really good place to start to gather data to see how people are engaging with your content. So say if a user is searching for something on Google that shows general interest, and that should then lead to, maybe moving that content up in your information architecture, maybe even deserves a menu item. And then if a user is searching for something on Google, they will probably search for that term on your website. There tends to be a one-to-one relationship there, especially if you have brand recognition. Say if I'm a veterinarian and I need to Google something, the verb Google, I will instead just go to their website and try to find that content. So this is where SEO is also important, because it all relates to the user experience. So yeah, like I was saying, the idea is to take this and have this start your conversations around information architecture. This will then lead into wireframes, designs, and things like that. And so we can see from this is that a lot of people are kind of Googling evergreen content, parvo, distemper, canine distemper. And this is also, it's kind of interesting. It seems that dog people are way more into Googling than cat people. I don't want to start any wars, but I am a dog person, and this is my dog. Her name is Honey, and she is the greatest dog of all time. Just kidding, she threw up on my rug this morning. Now, where were we? So you need to think really, it's just important to gather this data and think about how users are engaging with your content on and off the site. And so these terms, as we can see here, are really blog related. Oh, wow, the chat is exploding, guys. Oh my goodness, I didn't mean to start any wars. Shout out to the dog people. So you can see that these terms are very, one, dog related, but two, evergreen, blogs, things like that. So this was, now designers will recognize this as a raw IA. And so this is what we started with. And I know this is gigantic. So, and it's maybe not the case for all redesigns, but this is Oomph's process. So what we like to do is start with our information architecture, and we like to think about these top level items in the nav and how they relate to Google searches. And we like to think of them as clear and distinct. And so I know this is a mega menu, and this is something that we usually, just try to avoid generally, but it is, for this client, it was kind of unavoidable. So we needed to kind of lean into it. So we like to think of all of these top level menu items as something being searched. And this is where you use your Search Console data to lean into that. So we added, second from the right, we have this topics section where we wanted to add in our evergreen content. So those terms such as distemper and things like that, a lot of people were searching. You know what, let's just make it really easy for a user to find that information on our website. And so we added that, and then we had also this education menu item, which also relates. So we took this, and it eventually became a wireframe. So you can take a look at the IA. It got a lot trimmed. And these are still, the important terms that we would like. But I would like to kind of move past that for a second and talk about web page content. And something that's important to consider is that every page you has a certain amount of SEO wealth. If you add too many H2 terms, H2 tags, too many H1s, that is a bad thing. So you want to think that, say you have $100 for each page, you want to spend that wisely. And you don't want to burn that out so quickly. And so when you're thinking about this, we like to think of the content as how Googleable is it? So on the bottom left, we have this resources for veterinarians. On the right, we have AVMA's commitment. So if you turn that into a question, such as what is AVMA's commitment? What are some resources for veterinarians? That becomes something Googleable. Is that a word? I think it is. And then the next line should answer that question. And then that is what will translate to that Google search result. Because if I Google a question, such as, or just a statement, COVID-19 veterinary guidelines, and I have the page with the heading that matches that Google term, because I found that in my search console, then I should answer that right below. So, and one thing to note, if you're in the wireframing stage of a website or even in design, I know you don't have final content, and that is totally okay. But the important thing is to understand the page behavior that you'll be working with. And you should at least have an understanding of what the headings will be and map out, again, the page behavior and what you want the user to experience. You could also do some story mapping sessions. Even at this point, it's not too late to conduct some. And always think about that SEO wealth and how you don't want to spread that too thin. So here's what the menu actually turned into. And I'm hovering over resources and tools because on the right, you see this, the man with the dog. That's a pet owner section. And if I click that, I can get to helpful tips for pet owners. So I actually use this site all the time as a dog owner to check if I have any general questions about the care for Honey. And that was a direct relation from our Google Search Console report at the beginning. And so now it's important to think of everything as a searchable term, but with the user intent at the forefront. So we have membership in the top left. That may not be, a top level Google item. It didn't make the top 10 or even like the top 50, but it has a really high conversion rate opportunity. So if a user goes to the membership page, we want a very good user experience there. So then that user could then join AVMA and help make money for the company. So that is still SEO important. Advocacy is next. That's important from a business perspective. This really doesn't do much for SEO, but not everything has to be perfect for SEO. Sometimes it needs to meet a business requirement, which was this case. Education and careers, again, low traffic, but a super high conversion rate opportunity. So therefore, that page still needs to have a good overall user experience, good headings, etc. We talked about resources and tools. Then we have events. The AVMA convention is always one of the most searched terms during the time when people start to register for it. I think they actually are also doing a remote convention this year. And so that needs to be a top level item so people can just find it at all times. News, always important to have your news, blog posts, etc. as a top level item. And then about, always, always, always you should have an about page or something of that nature where you have your basic information about the company, contact information, etc. So just revisiting, what are our IA and wireframe and some design considerations? So always think of your navigation items as searchable content. Turn it to a question. How do I become a member, for example? Does that page then answer that question? The more and more you add to a page, the more you're spreading that page's SEO wealth. This could be fine if it's an overview page, or it could be bad if you really want that page to rank. Here's an important thing. When you're thinking of SEO wealth, don't go crazy with layout build. I've seen this where a content admin will add in 30 different H2s because they're using Layout Builder and it's so much fun, and then that page is impossible to Google. Consider your navigation and URLs. So it's important when you're thinking about your menu, what that URL is going to be. Is that readable for a human? And really, I think it's important to note at this stage, it should be really when you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Just keep it steady. Here is a design of a page, and this is actually not a page I care about having super great organic traffic to it. What we like on this page is to get those search engine results snippets on Google. So, if I'm Googling something, I just want the answer right there. So we have questions that could be intriguing, such as where do AVMA volunteers serve? How do I become a volunteer? What does a volunteer do? I just want to answer those questions immediately, and I want this to display in my Google snippet. I'm actually going to answer a quick question I saw just popped in. How would you define going crazy with paragraphs and/or layout builder? A good general rule of thumb to think about is every page or should try to follow the similar structure, which is 1 H1, which is your page title, 2 H2s, so top level topics of what the page should talk about, and then 3 H3s, 3 to 5 really. You don't want to go beyond that. If you are building a page and you're finding that you have a lot of blocks and it's really becoming tough to just read, if it's becoming a bad user experience, that's going to hurt your SEO. And that is kind of how I would define going crazy, going beyond those rules and limitations. And so for this page, it's also important to think about metadata when you're designing. So now is the point where you want to think about some of your page titles, meta descriptions, things of that nature. Again, content does not have to be final, but you should have a good mindset of where that's going to be. So some design considerations, again, think about the metadata, your page title descriptions, things like that. Conversion rate, CRO, conversion rate optimization. How will these pages perform if you have a form on it? Things like that. That is really important for design. If the form has, say, 6 steps to it, that may hurt the user experience and then hurt the SEO in general for that page. Alternative text, alt tags on images, covered their importance. Always, always, always add alt text. And content does not have to be final, but you need to understand the story that this page is going to tell and the user experience. And when you're designing pages, especially during a redesign, now's the time where you can stop duplicate content before it really gets off the ground. If you have 2 pages that are too similar, say which page needs to exist. If they absolutely both need to exist, maybe try to slightly change one of the page's intent. So now we should think about what some engineers need to know when building the website. And we've designed a beautiful site. Now we have to build it. So here's what engineers need to know. And I know I don't have a ton of time left, but this is going to go quick. So really, it's what not to forget. So engineers are integral to SEO. They're the ones who build it. So what are the things that you need to remember when building? To start, here's a basis of modules that should be installed for good SEO. Meta tags module. This is the original SEO module, very important for meta tags, things like that. This will become your best friend. Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics. We prefer using Google Tag Manager to handle all external JavaScript-based tags, including Google Analytics. So it's okay to have, you shouldn't have both, but if you have one or the other, that's totally fine. Rabbit Hole, I really like using the Rabbit Hole module for easy redirects, page URLs, things such as that. And then when creating your sitemap that you want to submit to Google Search Console, you can use one or the other. We found good experiences with both of these sitemap modules. So I'm going to run quickly through some basic meta tag module setups. So on the left, here's what's on the config page. Just make sure that what you have is enabled for basic pages, blog posts, things of that nature. And then on the right is how it will appear. And what we always prefer to do is put in our SEO failsafe, which is to add your node title, site name, and then we like to add a summary field to a lot of pages. So you have your node summary here. So this will automatically fill in no matter what, but we always recommend trying to custom page titles and descriptions where applicable. And then, so when you're building your page title, try to keep it SEO friendly. Under 90 characters is preferred, and a page description, usually like to write something custom. Keep it between 100, but you can go up to 300 characters, as we saw with that Drupal.org about result. Use distinguish with href lengths, things like that. You could also set a canonical URL, really important as well. And then you have your Open Graph protocol. So if you are publishing content on Facebook or LinkedIn, they use Open Graph protocol. So you need to fill out the tags there, or else maybe your image won't populate when you post a link on Facebook. So we recommend using Google Tag Manager as a way to add your Google Analytics tag. So you can see it as the second one down. But if you are just using analytics, that's fine. So we like to recommend Tag Manager as a way to fire multiple tags at once. If you're going to add a bunch of different JavaScript tags to your head, the page is going to load one after another, and that can hurt page. Whereas if you put it all in Tag Manager, it all fires once. And you can also use it to add events. And I think the other real benefit of Google Tag Manager is the ease of use. So those events, instead of adding an event in JavaScript from Google Analytics, you can add it here. A non-technical user can engage with Tag Manager pretty simply. So here's the module. It's a simple config. You just need to identify your sitemap URL and the content that you would like to include in that sitemap. You organize that by content type, and you take that URL, so your domain / XML sitemap, for example, and you submit that to Google Search Console. And this is for a small-ish site, about 115 URLs, and they get crawled just about every day. So when you post something new, Google is crawling your sitemap, and that's how it grabs in new content. And say if you have something urgent that needs to get out, you can also request indexing, and that can make things go a little bit quicker. Usually within an hour or two, then your sitemap will have been updated, and Google will then update your search results. But then there are websites where the sitemap is crawled 1 million times a day, such as NewYorkTimes.com. This helps a lot with your SEO because here are the errors and where the errors would display if you're getting a 400 or 4, for example, or a 504. I always recommend using Google Search Console on every website. So, you know, I think what's really important is that there's always more to learn, especially when it comes to SEO. And I hope from this talk you kind of gathered that you knew most of this and just needed to put it into practice. And if you have any other thoughts on SEO in general, I'd love to hear them. So yeah, I think now we can get into. So if you did not grab the link for the slides at the top, oomph.is/SEO-DC2020. I can dive into some questions now. So I was trying to keep up, but the chat was really started a lot after my dog comments, so sorry about that. Question, do you recommend any specific tool to evaluate page speed? Oh, thank you, Kaleem, for posting in. Kaleem, what's up, man? Yes, GT Metrics is a really good website that gives you results. And also Google has a tool called Page Speed Insights that can also generate those results. Brett Williamson asked, we are preparing for a redesign. We anticipate a lot of URL structure changes. What are the implications for this for SEO and how do we prepare for it? This is a really good question. It's something we run into a lot. We recommend that you add redirects from any old URLs that will no longer be in service. But it's good to know that every time you do a redesign, with every redesign we've ever done, we've seen a huge plummet, not a plummet, but a drop in organic traffic. It's going to happen, especially if a lot of URLs change. I think the important thing is to limit the damage. So make sure you have redirects from any old URLs that are no longer active. Make them a 301 redirect. And when you're thinking of a redesign, just think of the user search intent. I'm just kind of scrolling through typical use cases for the rabbit hole module. Updating URLs, especially if a client wants to have a unique URL for a specific change. It's good to do that. You then add in a redirect from the old URL. It's also good for displaying content, keeping it unpublished, or any pages that but maybe not found in a search on your website, things like that. Learning the ropes. Oh, there are so many good resources. Moz.com, MOZ.com has a really good just overall learning experience. And they have a basic intro course, Google Analytics. There's a Google Analytics course that you can take and then take a test at the end and get a certification. So that's kind of cool. We have a couple more minutes. I mean, okay, so if you have a request, if you posted a question early on, I definitely missed it. So you can throw it in right now again, and I'll try to answer them as quick as possible. I scrolled past, how long until the redesign dip recovers? It depends on how good your SEO is. Usually we see it it takes about a calendar year is the typical. So it's kind of heavy. We've seen it go quick though. Usually about a quarter to a calendar year. Scrolling back down, how have you used schema.org and is it worth diving deep in? It's worth using a module to do it for you. If you want to customize it, there's instructions on schema.org so you can write the proper schema and then submit that as a custom sitemap, but you can have a module do it for you. XML Sitemap is a good one. If you get traffic to old unpublished articles and people hit a 403 on your website, could you use a rabbit hole to redirect just the unpublished articles? Yes, or you can, we also just use the basic redirect. Scott, 410 code for removed contents or allow search to figure it out? No, I think that's actually a really good question and a good example. Yes, you can use 410 and 410 HTTP code for removed content. Or if you're using your sitemap and you remove content, that URL should be removed from your sitemap. Google crawls and you'll see that number go from, say, 150 pages down to like 110. Where in the meta tags, Kaleem, where in the meta tags can we canonical links? So that isn't under advanced. If you scroll down, you can set a canonical URL. Ooh, page load time module. That's cool. Thanks, Mike. Okay. Yeah, under advanced. Wow, that module is pretty cool. Schema meta tag. I've not used that module, to be honest, but thank you, Ian. I'm going to flag that one. Okay, we are at 5 o'clock Eastern. Any other questions? If not, if you could fill out the session survey, that would be fantastic. Thank you all for joining. Oh my, 200 people. I was not looking at that number for sheer anxiety. Should you remove 301 redirects eventually after a year or so? Yes, if you can. Cool. I will, I'm gonna stop this now, and thank you everyone for joining. I had a great time. So, yeah, cool. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks again. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, and last thing, if anyone left has any questions, you can hit me up on Drupal Slack @DJ. Have a good one.